Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Court Accountability with Legal AF on the Midas Touch Network. Today, we are joined by one of my favorite historians in America, Professor David Blight, who is the Sterling Professor of History at Yale University and who is a leading historian in America. And he and I are going to have a conversation about the assault on history that we're seeing right now. And this is an ongoing series of conversations we're having with David and others about, what's happening in America, why it matters, and what we can do about it. And so please do subscribe, like, and share this video. But without further ado, let me bring on Professor David Blight. And can you tell us a little bit about the recent column you wrote for the New York Times? Maybe we should start there.
Well, sure. On March 27th, President Trump issued, among his many, many other executive orders, an executive order directed quite openly against historians, the Smithsonian museums, the whole enterprise of American history. In fact, it was entitled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History. Now, the implication there is that without any psychiatric evidence or forensic evidence, that historians and their work has become insane. Now, of course, what they mean is that it's their claim that we are all a bunch of leftist, quote unquote, lunatics, and that's, of course, not true. The worst thing we could do is to simply try to refute that. There's no point in refuting that. There's no debate about such things. It's a claim, it's an assertion that, of course, the far right has been putting out there for many years. That particular executive order is born directly from the Project 2025 book. In fact, the language is drawn from there. And I actually did before I wrote that piece, and then subsequently a couple of speeches and lectures I've given, I went back to the 2025 project book and I counted approximately 114 goals. They call them goals. Those were prepared and written by a woman named Burke. Her name is actually Lindsay Burke of the Heritage Foundation, who prepared the whole education section of that document. Among these 114 goals are all sorts of things about getting rid of the Department of Education, advancing the idea of school choice, advancing the idea of charter schools. There are many ways they want to try to erode and eventually, if they can, destroy public schools. But a lot of it is about how American history is taught. And they believe that we've lost our way, that we don't teach the triumphs of America. We only teach the flaws, the tragedies, what's gone wrong in America, which is not true. And they have this idea that somehow the purpose of historical education and historical scholarship is to advance patriotism. They use the word patriotism openly, but more openly, they use phrases like the values of the founders. Now, every historian of the American founding, worth any salt, would tell you that the founders had quite different values. The Southerners, the Northerners, the middle colonies, they had bitter fights and debates and compromises. Their values were not all the same. And it's all rooted in this idea that somehow there is a standard version of American history that has been violated or dislodged in recent decades by the liberal elites of universities. That's really the point of that executive order by President Trump. So we have the challenge. In effect, that executive order declared war on historians, museums, and all the ways that we represent history to the public.
Yeah, it really is. It was a shocking executive order in a sea of shocking executive orders. But as you point out, Doctor, or should I call you Professor Blight?
Why not?
That it really is. It's an astonishing assumption. It's an assumption without evidence and facts. In essence, this idea that history has been captured by the left. In fact, when I look at this vast expanse of history of our country, and I look at the challenges that our nation has faced in trying to make the words of the Constitution real, the idea of we the people, coming together to create, to work for the general welfare of our country. The ideas in the Declaration of Independence about life and liberty, I think, and I'm wearing my pin today for you, which is my pin of Frederick Douglass with the quote about, power concedes nothing without demand, never has and never will. I think about Frederick Douglass going to that first meeting in Seneca Falls with women seeking the right to vote. And he was one of the only men there, this African American leader, the founder of the North Star newspaper, an abolitionist who worked tirelessly for equal rights, for the rights promised, by the Declaration of Independence, and then ultimately secured on paper through the Civil War and the Civil War amendments. I think of actually our history as one of tremendous triumph over repression and regression, although not, an unfinished work. But, those stories, the stories of where we were in terms of racial repression, in terms of slavery, the Jim Crow laws, and official racial segregation in this country, to where we are now, is actually not a story of shame, in essence, as they want to put it. The idea that if you teach
Right.
about
They
racial
use the
segregation,
word shame. They say that we're
yeah,
writing history in the interest of spreading shame among young people, and it's nonsense.
right. It's not
But
it's not true. And I also think it's like, sorry to interrupt, but it's like, actually, if people don't know that history, when they encounter it for the first time, they realize that they've been lied to. If that part of history is not part of our education. And so, anyway, I just want to say I'm so grateful for your efforts to speak up and speak out about this, Professor. And I wonder if you could share a little bit more about, I guess, some of the responses you're thinking about, and maybe colleagues are thinking about, how to respond to this assault on history, assault on truth, and also in particular this effort to remake the Smithsonian museums from places of repositories of truth into repositories of propaganda and whitewashing.
well, that's one that, to begin with your last point. That's one that I do not think they can win. The Smithsonian is beloved by millions, and not just Americans. People come from abroad to Washington. I forget the total percentage, but it's a large percentage of the people who visit the 21 museums of the Smithsonian in Washington are foreigners. Their art museums, history museums, Air and Space Museum, the great new African American Museum, which is the hottest ticket in Washington. People love these institutions, and the Trumpists have a tall order to try to convince Americans that those museums have been taken into the realm of shame. I wonder if they've actually even visited. The irony that you brought up Douglas is also something I don't want to pass on. I mean, the point there is, I mean, Frederick Douglass was a radical patriot. He really was, in the
Yes,
tradition
yes.
of honest, hard nosed, deeply dug, creedal patriotism. He wanted America to live up to its promise, and he at least had a renewed hope of that after emancipation and after the Civil War and with the triumphs of Reconstruction. You can find it all over his post-Civil War and his Civil War era ideas and thought and rhetoric. He's a radical patriot, demanding of the country, um, an adherence to creeds, which is what millions of us do and hope for. We don't walk around calling it patriotism necessarily. We don't say, okay, here comes the triumph now. I've just given you the tragedy. Now let's have the triumph. That's not the way history happens. History happens in this deeply conflicted mixture of human aspirations and human failures and human successes. I mean, just look at the immigration history of this country. It's both terrible and beautiful. A lot of people died trying to immigrate to this country, and about a third of them went back to wherever they came from for who knows what reasons. And after they arrived, there was a lot of poverty well, there was enslavement for millions of Africans, or in the case of the US, hundreds of thousands of Africans. But again, it comes back to this notion that somehow history is about making people feel good, uh, and especially young people. Now, I'm no expert on what the exact proper way to teach to a fifth grader. I was a high school teacher for 7 years of my life. I know a good deal about that, and I work with teachers all the time. Young people can deal with conflict. They can deal with irony. They can deal with contradiction. They see it in their lives every day. They have conflicts and contradictions with their siblings, conflicts and contradictions with their parents. Um, you know, we're not fooling ourselves if we think history can just be used to create a story people want to live in. That's not our job. And this executive order and the whole effort here of the American right to to attack, attempt to control, influence, not just historians and museums and the National Park Service, we should admit and say, a great source of public history in this country, but universities themselves. What they're doing is an assault on the very essence, the very reason universities exist, colleges, schools, right down to the elementary level. Schools, colleges, and universities exist to inspire curiosity, to inspire some kind of love of learning, whether that's in mathematics or a science or history or literature. It's to inspire young people to ask, to want to know, to dream about learning something, to becoming confident to be an expert on something. And when you learn something, you actually might want to convey it to somebody else. That's what
Yeah.
democracy is. It's us sharing somehow what we have and what we know with other people. Uh, it's an assault on the ethical level that we have a right to believe they cannot succeed at. The problem here is they, being the Trump administration and its minions, have enormous power now. The Heritage Foundation has been waiting to do this, frankly, since its inception in the early
Yep.
1970s. They
Yep.
have this vision that historians, academic history, universities, curriculums, schools have become these sites of radicalism. They have not. Now, I must say, and I'm one of the first to admit, it doesn't mean that we haven't done some sometimes silly things with curriculum. It doesn't mean that we haven't sometimes had some excesses in how we treat this or treat that, or we emphasize this instead of that. Um, no question. And academia in particular needs to look in the mirror. We need to be aware that to some degree we made ourselves targets, if for no other reason than just believing no one would bother us. That we had this academic freedom, everything would be fine. We'll just go do what we want. We'll write the books we want. We'll teach what we want. We write our own syllabi. Sure, we do. But we need to defend them. And we need to defend them out in the public, where the right wing in America, through its enormous media infrastructure, has reached people with this idea that liberalism and radicalism has ruined American history. No, it hasn't. It's made it much, much more interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that is so right. And when I think about this idea, this foundational principle of academic freedom and how rooted it is in freedom, the freedom
Yeah,
to think, the freedom to pursue research, the freedom to aspire to these ideals that are embodied in the grand phrases of our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And now we have an administration that is using the enormous power of the federal government to try to dictate literally what is taught in a classroom, both at the primary and secondary education level in states and cities and towns, and also at universities. It is an unparalleled, unprecedented, intrusive, authoritarian attack
Yeah.
on freedom of conscience and on the truth. And I can't move forward without saying, in part, Trump entrusted JD Vance with, helping to move this agenda forward, who literally
Smithsonian.
on the right
Yeah.
at the Smithsonian, who, in interviews after Trump made the outrageous, one of his many outrageous lies, but this lie that immigrants were eating cats and dogs in Ohio,
Yeah.
Vance defended that lie, basically saying you have to tell the lie to wake people up.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was just a shocking moment in of itself. But he should be
That means
nowhere
he's right
near.
over there with Lenin. Propaganda
Yeah,
has a purpose, and
yeah,
let him go with
yeah,
Lenin. You know.
yeah, right. And the idea that people who don't actually have any respect for the truth
Yeah.
should be the arbiters of what truth is told is extraordinary. And we've seen how that's played out. We saw in Florida in some of the textbooks that were being prepared in response to Ron DeSantis's edicts on these issues that they were eliminating mentions of Rosa Parks, why she was on that bus. And
Right.
then, of course, we saw in the past few weeks other aspects, other components of the Trump administration doing similar things, like the National Park Service at the direction of these new political appointees, trying to erase Harriet Tubman from
Yeah.
the story of the Underground Railroad and why she was right,
Take Jackie Robinson off the website of
right,
I forget what. No,
right,
well, it reaches the point of absurdity. Of course, I mean these are the most mainstream heroes now you can think of. It's not like they're taking the names of some black communists in the 30s off the websites. It's this Jackie Robinson who was a
right,
Republican in terms of
right,
voting, all of that. He was a great baseball player and a great
right,
civil rights hero. No, it's worse than that, and I love the fact that you use the word freedom here, because it's the most used and sometimes overused word in our lexicon. Everybody uses the word freedom, freedom this, freedom that. It's used in commercials, but this is basic. Do you have the freedom to think or not? Do you have the freedom to go try something or not? Do you have the freedom to fail? Do you have the freedom to go do research wherever it takes you? Do you have the freedom to write that up in a narrative that you believe follows the evidence, which is just simply basic to doing history? And here again, I want to stress the fact that, I mean, I'm old enough to have learned now through various books I've written, especially the Frederick Douglass biography that I did, because I did countless numbers of book events and book clubs and so on and so forth. Americans can deal with it. Young people can deal with it. Not all of them, but most of them can. They want to know the truth about history or get close to it. They want to know what your evidence is. If you're going to make that claim, they want to know how. And we got to be ready to tell them that's what we do. And this idea that somehow through political propaganda and political pressure and the use of government agencies, that's what's happening here. You can somehow alter the way Americans are going to learn their history. Well, you can if you can control it long enough with sufficient power and you don't get sufficient resistance. In this sense, what we're experiencing now has the potential to be worse than McCarthyism. McCarthyism had a single claim: members of the Communist Party. I mean, it was terrible. It was brutal. Uh, and but it kind of wore itself out. McCarthy had the microphone for about 2 or 3 years. McCarthyism survived him, and it certainly predated him. McCarthyism, as we call it, the search for communists in American society, way predates Joe McCarthy. But there were about 100 or so academics fired during the McCarthy attacks of the 1950s. There were even more high school teachers either fired or their careers ruined or badly influenced by McCarthyism. What's going on now has already affected more people than that. Hundreds and hundreds of people who've lost NEH grants, have lost Fulbright grants, the research money. I'm talking about the humanities now and social sciences, not talking about the medical world. That's even worse. But if you cut people at the National Park Service and you don't have personnel to even interpret those sites anymore, you're going to get a reaction from Americans because they love those sites. And if they really think they can move J.D. Vance and these other two people that Trump claimed he was appointing to the regents of the Smithsonian, the board of the Smithsonian, and not get pushback, they're wrong. They're about to find out how much historians have Lonnie Bunch's back. Lonnie Bunch is the secretary of the Smithsonian. They're about to learn how much Americans love those museums. And they're about to learn, I think, that most Americans are not quite as empty or facile as the Trumpists seem to believe they potentially are. Now, that I'm not a Pollyanna about these things. I don't fully trust the historical education of the American people. That's why I do what I do. Um, but I'll say one last thing on this notion here. What this has done, and I'm trying to find some positives in these things, uh, aren't we all? But it's actually throwing historians back on their heels. It's throwing us back to basics. What are we about? What are our methods? What are our ethics? What are our rules? What are our purposes in doing this? And it turns out we're finding out we really believe in this. We know we're relevant. We know the country needs us now. The country needs historians right now. I get, well, calls not only from great podcasts like yours, but the press and so on, and they want to know, what's going on? How did we get here? you know,
Yeah.
so if anything, that could be a long-term gain for us, but there's a tremendous amount of damage being done by these assaults on universities. It's chilling. It's making people self-censor. And there's a lot of young scholars, researchers, students who are losing fellowships and scholarships. And let's be honest here. Some of the best soft power the United States ever created is in a program
Yeah.
like the Fulbright program. I had a
Yep.
Fulbright.
Yep.
32 years ago, I went to Germany for a year. I taught American history in Munich. It was one of the
Yeah.
most amazing experiences of my life. And I know I've met hundreds of other people who've done Fulbrights abroad and people who've come from abroad to do Fulbrights here. All kinds of disciplines, all kinds of fields. That's the best thing the Cold War ever created.
Right. Right. Well, on that note, Professor, let me just say, will you come back next week? I hear you have a commencement address you're going to give this weekend, but I wonder whether you might come back next week to share some of it with us, because this is just such an important ongoing conversation. If you will, I know I'm exerting pressure on the air for you to say yes, but that would
Fine,
be so wonderful.
I'm going out in a couple of days to my alma mater at Michigan State, huge Big Ten university. And for my sins, I'm the commencement speaker in a basketball arena with 15,000 people. And I'm taking up this current moment, this current problem of the assault on, particularly on education, as the topic. I don't know
Yeah.
how the parents and grandparents are going to take it, and I don't know how the students are going to take it, but I'm not giving a commencement address full of the usual cliches. I'm going there to tell them that history came for my generation, which was the Vietnam generation, and history is now coming for them too.
Yes.
And
Well,
they got to be good at their response.
excellent. Excellent. Well, I look forward to talking with you again next week. whenever
Yeah.
works for you. And I just want to say it's just an honor and a joy to be in this conversation, in this dialogue with you, and to be part of this series of conversations on Legal AF with the Midas Touch Network. This is Lisa Graves from Court Accountability. So glad you joined me, Professor Blight. An honor to be with you, and thank you all for tuning in, and we'll have more to come.
Thank you, Lisa. See you next time.
Thank you so much.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.